Welcome to my spoiler-filled review for Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Ooh. Although revenge against who, I don't know, because nobody from the first film comes back for this one, unless it's just revenge against the general community. Now, normally when a sequel completely does a recast from top to bottom, my first words that come into my mind might be straight to video or half-arsed. But in this case, it actually works pretty well, because what it does is it retains the mystery of what happened to Nancy and her friends at the end of Nightmare 1. In fact, the only additional snippet of info we get about Nancy in this one is that supposedly there was once this crazy girl who lived at 1428 Elm Street, and her mum had to lock her in a room, put bars on the window, and then the girl witnessed her boyfriend dying across the street. Events that I don't necessarily remember happening in that way from the first film, but we'll go with it. So the new main character in this one is a boy called Jesse, who along with his parents has just moved into the house that the Thompsons have at some point vacated. And it's not long before Jesse is getting visited by Freddy in his dreams, but not to kill him, seemingly. Freddy gets a chance to very early on, but he doesn't take it. Instead, he just comes out with all this cryptic mumbo-jumbo, which didn't really mean anything to me. Now, this was the first time watching this movie for me, and yet at this point of the film I suddenly remembered that I'd seen a clip of this film from some YouTube review or horror documentary maybe from later on in the film, where Freddy comes out of the boy's body, and so I thought to myself, well, actually I know what this film's going to be about now. It's going to be about Freddy trying to use this kid to get back into human form, which sort of makes sense. I mean, if you discover that you have the power to kill people in their dreams, then it stands to reason you might further explore your powers to see if you could get back into the real world somehow. So I thought that's what they were going for. I thought, okay, they're trying something different this time. It's a new plot. Let's see where they go for. Unfortunately, roughly after this point, I got a little bit bored, it has to be said. All the stuff that happened afterwards with the teacher and the barbecue, I was just a bit bored. I was checking my watch constantly in the second half of the film, and I even did that thing, you know, where you sort of pause your DVD to see the time bar, to see how long's left. I did that a couple of times. And at the end, my first thought was, whew, well, at least I don't have to sit through that again. But there's a twist to this review, because I went to make myself a coffee and I suddenly had a light bulb moment where I thought, I've completely interpreted that entire film wrong. You see, I'd just been watching it as a straightforward case of Freddy comes out the boy's body, starts killing people at the barbecue, so it succeeds in his plan basically, and then gets thwarted by Lisa. But I don't think that's what you're meant to think. I think we're meant to believe that it's actually Jesse who's killing people at the barbecue, and that Freddy never actually gets out of him, if ever that was his intention. I don't think Freddy kills anybody in this movie. And once I came to the realization that I had this brand new theory, the whole film changed for me. Well, not to the point where I thought it was an instant classic or anything like that, but I'll explain what I mean, and you can disagree with me if you want, but I did go on the internet after the film to try and find some definitive answer of what the plot is meant to mean in this film, and there isn't one. Just like with the first movie, everybody's got their own opinions, so I've got mine, so I'll tell you what I think. Here we go. Now, obviously, it's heavily implied that Jesse might be gay. Well, in my version of the film, he's definitely gay. So at the start of the film, when you see Freddy driving that bus into the desert, you'll notice that there are two blonde girls on board, even after everybody else has got off. And what I think has happened here is that Jesse's had some kind of weird attempt at a sexual adventure with these two blondes in his dream, but it's gone wrong because he's gay, and they've started laughing at him. I think they actually turn around on the bus and laugh at him for no reason at one point. But then Freddy's come along and just made the whole thing worse by preying on Jesse's angst and creating this nightmare scenario with the bus and the canyon, and that's what's going on with that. It's an excellent sequence, by the way. That's the only scene in the entire movie I really enjoyed at the time that I was watching it. It's really great. And you can enjoy that scene for what it is, no matter what you think is going on in the rest of the movie. So let's fast forward to the part where Jesse goes to the gay bar. I think he does this for real. It's not a dream. He meets his teacher there, who's also gay, and his teacher takes him to the school to punish him. But I think Jesse was hoping that his teacher would orchestrate some kind of sexual adventure with him when they get to the school. But despite how grim he looks, Marshall Bell always looks grim, I think it turns out that his teacher is completely professional, doesn't put any moves on him, and this pisses Jesse off to the point where he gets his claw out, his clawed glove that he's got in his pocket, and kills his teacher in the shower. And all that stuff with his bum getting whacked and dragged along the floor, I think that's just Jesse picturing in his mind Freddy doing the killing when it's actually just him that did it. So then he gets found later on with his clothes half off, etc., etc. Later on, when Jesse's making out with Lisa, I think this is something that he's just trying or going along with because he does love Lisa somewhat, but then he realizes he's just not into it, and the tongue coming out thing is just a manifestation of, you know, his body rejecting the fact that this is happening. So then he goes off to his friend's house. He really fancies his friend, and in his muddled way of thinking, he's really hoping that if he stays over at his mate's, those feelings will be reciprocated, but obviously they don't get reciprocated. So the two boys go to sleep, but it's at this point that Freddy, still feeding this hate into Jesse, completely makes him snap. And that's the point where we see Freddy coming out of the body. But I don't think Freddy's literally coming out of the body. I think this is just the point where Jesse just completely loses it and becomes a complete psycho killer. Now, I'm going to add a disclaimer at this point that I'm not trying to make the suggestion that gay people who experience sexual frustration are likely to become homicidal. This could easily be a straight character in this film, and Freddy could do exactly the same thing to them, and the straight person could become a homicidal. Gay, straight, you could easily go down this route if affected by Freddy. It just so happens that the character in this film is gay, I think. So he kills his friend, and then he starts going on a mad rampage at the barbecue. And if you notice, nobody at the barbecue, confronted supposedly by Freddy, reacts by saying things like, "Oh my God, what is that monster?" or "What is that horrible thing?" You know, they just sort of stand there a little bit as if, "Jesse, what are you doing?" You know. So that's why, another reason why I think that it's definitely Jesse doing the killing. He's just completely snapped. And then the reason why Freddy seems to fade away towards the end is because Lisa just talks him down, and that's when he gives himself into the police, and then he gets arrested for murder, goes to prison. So basically, Freddy wins in his little game of trying to coax this kid into becoming a killer. And the dream on the bus at the end is just Jesse in prison, having this dream back to nicer days where, you know, he'd ride the bus to school, and then Freddy comes along for one last scare, as if to say, "Haha, you know, I might still pop back and see you now and again." So yeah, this is my interpretation of the movie. It's very bleak. Jesse ends up in prison. Freddy's just, I don't know, maybe now that all the kids in school are talking about this crazed killer with the glove with the knife for fingers, this gives Freddy the power to come back for a part 3. But like I said, everybody could have their own ideas about what's going on in the film. That is mine, and for my money, it works a hell of a lot better than if you're actually thinking that Freddy's doing the killings. In terms of pros and cons on a more general level, well, if we start with the pros, I did like the character of Lisa. I thought she was the standout, not that there were many to pick from. And I liked what Freddy did with the boiler room, making it appear in the basement like that. And it was a cool little touch that even after Jesse woke up, the heat from the boiler still seemed to linger in the house, making the characters sweat. But on the whole, I don't think there were as many of those little special effects flourishes in this film like there were in the first one. But certainly my biggest negative overall is just that there's not that much in this film that's exciting or exhilarating. I didn't feel much emotion when I was watching it. And even after it had finished and I came up with a version in my head that worked for me, I still don't look back on it with that much joy. It's a well-written story. It's creative. It's original. It tries to do something different within the Freddy Krueger world, but it's just not as good as the first one, not by a long stretch. Though I still do have enthusiasm for part 3 because I've heard that's the best sequel of all, so we'll see what we get with that one. But for now, let's just head to the Bag of Terror and find out what score we've got for this. There's not much in here. So we've got 2.5 bloody axes out of 5 for Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 Freddy's Revenge. That's an average score, not bad, not great, although I should add that just at the end of this film, when I finished it, I was originally thinking more along the lines of 1 or 1.5. So my new theory of the film that I came up with really has bumped up the score a little bit. Incidentally, if you do go with my theory, then the film almost becomes similar to Blair Witch 2 Book of Shadows in terms of the idea of a villain trying to frame the protagonists for murder. I'm not trying to offend any Nightmare on Elm Street fans by comparing your franchise with Blair Witch 2 Book of Shadows, which is a terrible film. At least this film has some restraint in terms of at least allowing you to make your own interpretation. So there we go. I will be back soon for Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors. Until then, cheerio, bye-bye.